Would there be anyone who likes to visit a hospital? I would say that the answer would be no. No one likes to be in a hospital. A hospital is a necessity, something that you are driven to go. Nobody would willingly want to go to a hospital. That is what one would think. Yet today we have a poem by Tony Hoagland, the great modern American poet, who writes, Why I Like the Hospital. The poet tells us that he likes the hospital, and in this poem, he gives his reasons for liking the hospital. So, this is something right at the start we can say that there is irony. Irony is one of the poetic devices used because there is no way anybody would like a hospital. Hospital is synonym with sickness, ill health, death. So all our thoughts go to something that is morbid. But here he seems to like it. So let's examine why. Because it's all right to be in a bad mood there, slouching along through the underground garage, riding wordlessly on the elevator with the other customers, staring at the closed beige doors like a prison wall. So, the very first line gives us the idea why he feels that hospitals are good and why he likes hospitals. He says, It's all right to be in a bad mood there. You don't have to smile, you don't have to show a brave face. You can scream, you can cry, you can say that, no, I don't like needles, don't give me an injection. You can be grumpy. Nobody is going to tell you how to behave. And that is the main reason why he likes hospitals. He says, you can be in a bad mood there. You can go slouching through the underground garage. He calls it an underground garage, the hospital. That is to show a dark ambience of the hospital, something quite undesirable. And why is this person slouching? Slouching is to walk with your shoulders hunched up, you're dragging your feet, you're showing that no, I don't want to be in this place. And that is allowed because it is a hospital. So he says you can just slouch around, show a grumpy face, be unpleasant, riding wordlessly on the elevator with the other customers. So, elevator or lift is a closed, confined space. It's such a small space. People have to be standing near one another. And if you imagine if you are in your building and you're going up in the lift, you would say good morning to whoever is standing next to you. You would say, excuse me, please, after you. So, these are all the polite words we would use. But in the hospital elevator, nobody is going to talk to each other. They would probably be wearing their masks. They are looking impatiently when will the lift open to the floor that I need to go. And they're not going to bother about anybody else. Here, a very important word is used, the other customers. The poet calls the other patients as other customers. This makes us think about the modern day hospitals and the way of treatment. It has become more like customers. People are going to hospitals and their ailments are quite prolonged, and the hospital is kind of giving it like it's more of treatments that are over a long period of time. And we also know that there are, if you take go into a field like plastic surgery and various fields where the question arises, was it really necessary for these people? Are we to call them patients? They have not reached there because they are seriously ill, but rather because they are dissatisfied by the way they look. They wish to change their exterior, and such a person can only be called a customer. On the other hand, even those people who are sick, quite often we see hospitals, you know, they are not only going to give them the medicine that is sufficient for them to, get out of the sickness, rather, they would give them prolonged care packages. These days, we refer to it as packages, whether it is a delivery, whether whatever kind of treatment it is called a package. A package which would have a detox after the surgery. They would have a prescribed diet through which a doctor or a medical staff would see you through it. And very often in modern lifestyle, people don't have anybody else residing with them. They are living alone by themselves, and they feel that it would be more convenient and more restful to be in a hospital, such that even after the period of illness, if they require to be taken care of, they stay in the hospital. And if you compare it to olden times or a little bit before, we would see that a patient who, as soon as he is well, would go back to his family. So the very establishment of family is also questioned here. Do people have other people, family, friends, people who can take care of them in this busy modern life? You need to pay to be taken care of. You need to pay hospitals such that your health is taken care of. Staring at the closed doors, beige doors, like a prison wall. Now, here comes the satire, where on one hand they are customers. A customer should be able to, demand services. And definitely the customer or the patient here is demanding services. At the same time, the poet says, staring at the door like it's a prison wall. That statement tells us that they cannot get out. They do not have the mobility to leave the hospital premises. This sickness and this lifestyle condemns them to be in the hospital. So they are almost like prisoners, prisoners who are paying very highly to stay in their prison walls. The word like a prison wall is a simile. So another device that the poem uses is simile. Now, so we see that the one reason why our poet likes hospitals is because you can be in a bad mood there. You can be grumpy. You don't need to talk to anybody else on the elevator. He continues, I like the hospital for the way it grants permission for pathos, the mother with cancer deciding how to tell her kids, the bald girl gazing downward at the shunt installed above her missing breast. Now he is coming to the second reason. The second reason why he likes hospitals is it gives permission for pathos. So, what do you mean by pathos? Pathos is the showing of emotion, of showing deep emotion over a situation. So, he says the hospital allows people to cry, to curse, to say, this has happened to me, and that raw emotion is being dealt with there. So, he says the mother with cancer, she is deciding how she will break the news to her kids. Quite often we see that in various walks of life, a person would be suffering deep mental and physical anguish. And they would hide it behind a smile. They would carry on doing their daily activities without telling the truth of their situation to anyone around them. And it is such a burden, but they would hold on to it. They do not want to show their vulnerability. They do not want to open the door to show how much they are suffering. But this is where, in a hospital, you see that there is a permission for pathos. Not in an office, not in a home, not at a party. No, you cannot show your true emotions. But in the hospital, yes, the patient can say, I am in pain. The patient can tell her children, such is my situation. The mother can prepare her children for seeing her through that passage, for being there with her through the journey of chemotherapy, of a surgery. So, all this is possible in a hospital. Here, our poet is telling us that human beings, we have constructed these huge barriers We are in a world where it is supposed to be that we have no barriers. The internet, the very world is brought so close together. Parents, unlike parents of previous ages, can chat with their children every day. They know exactly where their children go. The location is shown on the phone, on your tab. You know where your child is. But does it mean that you have a relationship such that you can tell everything? Talk about the journey of your life as a parent to a child, or a child can a child express his or her fears, ambitions, dreams to the teachers or parents around? So, this world that is today brought closer, is it actually very close? Or are we showing fake emotions? Are we saying no to pathos? Is there too much of a demand to be strong, to be a superman or a superwoman? Should we always remain happy? Again, there is this modern concept of running after happiness, running after perfection, such that we cannot show our vulnerable self. So there is a bald girl and she is gazing at the shunt above her missing breast. She has lost her breast to cancer. And after the surgery, there is a shunt. A shunt is a tube that is fitted in order to drain out fluid. It is a passage. A medical shunt is something that has been put in order to take out the fluid. So this girl is looking down on her body. She is wondering what has happened and how she will go through. So now we see that the poet is taking us to the deeper sense of the very distinction that is there in this world, and that is the healthy and those who suffer from ill health. Is there enough understanding between these two worlds, where one part we see healthy people, people who are enjoying, and then there is a world where people, for their daily activities, for things that we take for granted, they have to put in a lot of effort. So the poet is making us think about all these issues. The crone in her pajamas, walking with an ivy pole. I don't like the smell of antiseptic or the air conditioning set on high all night, or the fresh flowers that are tossed in the wastebasket. So now the poet is also telling, so these are the people he sees, he's looking around. There is a crone. The word crone means an ugly old woman. So usually one uses a term like a graceful old lady, but here he says an ugly old crone because this lady is disgruntled. She's walking around with an ivy pole. We see that her mobility is constrained, restrained. Perhaps she wants to leave the hospital quickly. Maybe she is disgruntled and thinking that, yes, I am old. I wish I could die in peace. I wish I could go back home. But no, she is held to the hospital. She is walking around with that ivy pole, which is not going to let her walk too far. So now the poet is going to list a few things that he does not like about hospitals. He says, I don't like the smell of antiseptic. Antiseptic is the chemical that is put so that these microorganisms do not grow, that such that sickness does not spread. So that smell is rather pungent and odious, very powerful. So the poet does not like that smell. And he says, I do not like the air conditioning that is set so high. That is something very common that we notice in hospitals. If you sit in a big hospital, you feel that you're freezing because everything has to be very sterile and cold, and there is a lot of machinery which also needs the air conditioning. So everything is quite extremely clean and frigid, so and very cold. And he says also the fresh flowers that are tossed in waste baskets. So this is again taking us to a world which is no longer organic. We're not talking about potted plants. When we think of a garden with potted plants, plants in the soil flourishing, it is such a beautiful image that you want to keep gazing at it. But here in the hospital, we see that a lot of people will send bouquets of flowers. They would give fresh flowers as gifts to their relatives. And is there any meaning in this gesture? Quite often, the person who is sending would not even know the patient well. And there is not much thought put to it. It is simply an action of politeness. It is something official. They know that such and such a person is in the hospital. So, in order to show that respect, these flowers would be sent. It is not as if the person who has sent it wants to know what the patient is going through. It is merely an act of showing the patient with a get well card. A lot of flowers are sent over. And what happens to these flowers? The nurse or the caretaker who comes in the evening after a day of exhibiting those flowers in the room while other patients come in, these flowers are simply taken and tossed into the wastebasket and thrown away the next day. So, modern life makes a mockery of so many things. So, here the poet is telling us that we need to think deeper. If we know that someone is sick, we need to know what it is that that person would desire the most. What kind of comfort can we give? Is it just a bouquet of flowers with no meaning attached to it? Or should we help them out psychologically, physically, in any other manner? We need to think about this. But I like the way some people on their plastic chairs break out a notebook and invent a complex scoring system. To tally up their days on earth, the column on the left says, "Times I acted like a fool," and facing the column on the right that says, "Times I acted like a saint." So now this is again one more point that the poet likes. He says that I like the fact that people know they're sitting on their chairs and they have a book outside, and on the left side there is a column saying, "Times I acted like a fool," and on the right side, "Times I acted like a saint." So they are taking a tally of their life. Today there is a concept of a mindful living. We need to live mindfully. Our previous generations did not need the reminder to live mindfully. They were living mindfully. But today it is such a fast moving world. We are so involved in matters that do not really, give us anything positive. We are into a lot of toxic material that is around us. One of the main things is definitely the internet, which is giving stories of, making people false, giving them false hopes, giving them a lot of insecurity. So, in such a world, people are very conscious about their life, and it is when they are in a hospital they realize that the days are passing, and they feel the need to tally up to see what am I doing with my days. The hours that are endlessly going by scrolling through meaningless stuff, how much is it taking out of my life? I must tally it, I must journal it, I must make a diary, and I have to write up what is going on in my life. So, on one hand, they are scribbling notes. These are the times I acted as a saint. These are the times I acted as a fool. So, here the poet is telling us that there is, nobody is immortal. Death and, the end of life is just around the corner. And if we wish to reach our ambitions, we need to move forward. We need to stop looking at the world around us, being competitive or having comparisons with others. These are things we should not do. So, it is in the hospital that sudden awareness comes to people. You often see a person who is wasting his life with vices like alcohol or smoking or drugs. Such a person, because of his own social vices, may end up in a hospital, and that is when he suddenly thinks that he has to change his ways. And that is when he starts journaling and writing down. These are the moments that I have spent in meditation. These are the moments I have spent in introspection, in self reflection. And so I like the long. So this is again, we've got one more point why our poet likes uh, the hospital. One is because of the pathos. Second is because you can be disgruntled and ill mannered. Then, third, he likes the way people become self aware and they start journaling. They start writing down their thoughts, expressing their emotions. Fourth is, we're going to see what it is. I like the long prairie of waiting, the forced intimacy of the self with the self. Each sick person standing in the middle of a field like a tree, wondering what happened to the forest. So now the poet says, I like the long prairie of waiting. Prairie is, it is a land, a long portion of land. So here it stands as a metaphor for a very long period of waiting. So in the hospitals, the hours don't seem to move. The patient is sitting and waiting and waiting. In the evening, the nurse may come with more medicines, and until then, there is nothing much to do in a hospital. And any further activities restrained because you are most likely in pain. So there is a lot of intimacy of the self with the self. When a person is endlessly waiting, this also brings to mind the concept of visitors coming to see a patient. And there may be times when a patient is alone, staying alone and having to look at himself or herself in the mirror, looking into oneself, introspection, wondering and also analyzing how he or she has spent their life till then. So there is a forced intimacy, those things, those thoughts that are in back of our mind, which we try to push away. We don't want to face those fears, those anxieties, those demons. We don't want to face them. We are constantly pushing them away. And it is in this waiting room that a patient has to come to terms with those thoughts. There is no other way out. There is no one else with whom you may make small talk, with whom you may make some meaningless talk and laughter and drive these thoughts away. You have to face it yourself. So, this is also something that the poet likes, this forced intimacy with the self, because that is the only way a person is going to acknowledge his own problems or his own faults when one is in direst need. You know, he is so weak that he has to face, his ego has to subside, her fears have to subside, and the true self comes forth. Each sick person is standing in the middle of a field, a tree that is cut off from the rest of the trees in the forest. All of a sudden, your tomorrow no longer resembles the tomorrow of every other person who is leading a healthy, normal life. They would get up in the morning, they would go, a student would rush to school, a young man or woman would rush to office, and there would be those routine activities that go on throughout the day, the three meals that would be made, the mother waiting for her child. But all that comes to a standstill when you are in a hospital. All that you know that you are in a clean room that smells of antiseptic, and it has a door and a wall like a prison wall. You are held there, immobile, knowing and having to acknowledge your fears and your anxieties. And once I saw a man in a lime green dressing gown, hunched over in a chair, A man who is not yelling at the doctors or pretending to be strong or making a murmured phone call to his wife. Now the poet is giving us the instance of a man who is sitting, he's wearing a lime green dressing gown. By telling us about the dressing gown, we are immediately made to think of the hospital. You know how the hospital has robes, or a hospital gown is given to a person, and that is a visual imagery. The hospital gown immediately makes you feel the one who is wearing immediately feels like a patient. There is no longer any trace of your everyday life, and those who see you also immediately register you as a nameless patient of the hospital. So this man is sitting hunched over in a chair. The fact that he is sitting hunched over shows that obviously he is not in a positive mood. He is sitting tired, and he's not yelling at the doctors. He's not angry with anyone. He knows that this sickness is his own and he must deal with it. The doctors can help him to a certain point, they can alleviate the pain, but ultimately it is he himself who must go through it. He is not pretending to be strong anymore. You see a person who is slightly sick, they would hold on to you know, an imagery or a fake image of being very strong. But this person has reached the end of his journey. Perhaps he sees no need to show any kind of strength or show of strength. He's not making a murmured phone call even to his wife. He would rather spend those moments alone with his own self, thinking out his thoughts, talking to himself. There is an internal dialogue probably going on in his mind. But one sobbing without shame, pumping it all out from the bottom of the self. So this person is sobbing his heart out. And here the poet is telling us that man needs to reach that worst and direst condition in order to sob his heart out. We are so well trained not to show our emotions. If you look at the social media on a daily basis, if you look at platforms like Instagram and Facebook and every other platform, we see people faking the mood or the feeling that they have. A person who is sad might put up a status saying, I'm feeling blessed, or I'm ecstatic or happy. A smiling picture may be followed by a person who is so lonely that he or she is contemplating suicide. So these are all the problems of modern day life. And that is what our poet is trying to tell us. He's pumping out all his emotions out of his self. The overflowing bilge of helplessness and rage. Now, this bilge is also a word for nonsense, emotions in which this patient is helpless, filled with a rage, and there is this anger. Quite often, a person who gets a verdict that you have cancer or you have a tumor, you have this sickness that is not going to leave you till death, it is incurable. Such a person can have varying emotions. It could be sadness, and at the same time, it could be helpless rage, because the question comes, why me? Why am I picked out for all these illnesses? Why me? Quite often, when we are blessed, we do not ask the question, why me? But when we are sick, ill, aching, we ask the question to the universe, why me? Why am I picked out for this horrible, incurable disease? But if you looked, you could see that he was holding his own hand in sympathy, listening to every single word, and he was telling himself everything. So here the poet is ending the poem on a note that is wry, modern, rather morbid humor, but at the same time, you feel a kind of love or affection gushing out through his lines because here finally the self is acknowledging oneself. Now, all our life we are trying to play roles, we are not trying to be our authentic, true self. We want to show ourselves in a certain manner. We are so dependent on our ego. We want people to perceive us in such and such a manner. But here, towards the end of the poem, he says, if you look closely at that man, you can see that he has a lot of sympathy for himself. He is holding his own hand, trying to console himself, listening to every single word that he himself has to say. So the poet is making us think, do we need to wait so long to give some credit to ourselves? Do we need to beat ourselves up so much when we fail at certain things in life? When we make up a certain dream and if we are not able to achieve it, we despise ourselves. Today's world, we deal with body shaming or body dysmorphia where people feel that they do not look good enough and they do so much of ill treatment to the body. Do we with ecstasy say thank you to our body for all the blessings that this body has given us or this mind has given us? But we are quite often, we concentrate on all the weak points and we despise ourselves. We despise ourselves to the extent that so many people have taken their own life. How much must a person despise oneself for such an act? Think. And that is where the poet tells us that what we need is an overwhelming level of compassion, so much compassion for the self as well as the world outside. So, some of the poetic devices that Tony Hoagland, the poet, is using is one is a visual imagery of a hospital, second, irony, wry humor is also used, then it is a satire, and we can see there is a transposing of emotions, that is taking an emotion and exchanging it for another. The very fact that when you say hospitals, immediately we say boring, tiresome, but there he is transposing the emotion of liking it, having affection for it. And on one hand, he tells us that the modern world has become very fake, very inorganic. We see that, the very flowers that are given, fresh flowers, they're very costly, they're given to a patient. Probably the sender does not even know the patient well, has never taken time out to visit this person when he or she was alive and healthy, but sending over flowers maybe to a coma patient who would never even see it, and these very same flowers are dumped in the put in the wastebasket. This is also symbolic of a fast changing world where everything is temporary. The clothes we use, the food we take, everything has a temporary value. So the microcosm of a human life is set against the background of a macrocosm of the entire universe. That is, we concerned about the generations that are going to come, or do we use everything in such a way that it is only used for the moment, it is then thrown out into the ocean, the air and the soil, thereby contaminating them and making the world. Word meanings: pathos, a quality that evokes pity or sadness; shunt, a tube implanted to collect blood or body fluid; antiseptic, substance that prevents the growth of disease-causing microorganisms; complex, complicated; prairie, enormous stretch of flat grassland;